Hello, Tyne. Today I'm going to tell you how to tell a good story, either spoken or written. Just the key components to telling a story that people actually want to listen to. I started thinking about this the other night over dinner. I was hanging out with a bunch of friends and I was having a really hard time with one-on-one conversations. I'm not great at small talk, I'll admit that right off the bat. But then when I started telling a story that I thought was super funny and weird and interesting, a story I've told quite a bit, all of the other people, 8 people, stopped talking to listen to me. And I realized that there's power behind telling a good story. And there's a certain way to tell a good story correctly so that other people listen and are interested. Here's the components that I think are really useful for telling an interesting story, for getting people's attention, and for just conveying emotion and making people laugh. Because for me, telling a good story means making people laugh. Even when I'm writing horror or something sad or something crazy and stupid and impossible, I like to make people laugh. It makes me feel good, it makes them feel good, and that's the point of life, is to feel good, right? So the components. Having a hook, having a good tone of voice in some way to convey it that's interesting, finding the interesting things and skipping the small details, having a point to the story and knowing when to end it. I'm gonna have a couple of examples throughout this so that you know what I'm talking about and it's not just theory. It's sometimes hard to come up with the right story and when to tell the story, but you can tell a story about literally anything. I have a story that I tell when people ask where I'm from. When I'm in the US, when I'm abroad, I can't tell this story because people don't know where Oregon is, but I could say that I'm from Oregon, and people will be like, oh, from Portland, and I'd be like, no, it's 3 hours south of Portland, and they're like, oh, that's cool, what's it called? And I'm like, Bend, and they're like, I've never heard of Bend, and then some people are like, oh yeah, I've been to Bend, I love it there, and I'm always like, you've been to Bend? That's really weird. But that's not the story I tell, because that's not interesting, that's small talk. I hate small talk. Here's what I do tell them. This story changes person to person. Sometimes I say, oh yeah, I'm from a little dot of blue surrounded by red. Other times I say, I'm from a little town in the middle of nowhere. It's high desert. It doesn't rain all year, and then in the winter it dumps 3 feet of snow. That's finding something interesting. Here's another way that I tell the story. Yeah, I'm from a small town in the middle of Oregon that isn't close to anything. All of our malls are outdoors and there's hardly anything in them. But it's a ranching town, so people unironically wear their cowboy boots and hats to Walmart and Target and places like that. It's a place where someone once asked my Asian friend, what brand of Oriental are you? Which doesn't make any sense at all. At all, ever. But yet, somehow has become a tourist town where everyone from California, whenever they want to take a break, comes to visit. It makes no sense. See how all of those are a lot more interesting than just saying, oh yeah, I'm from a small town that no one's ever heard of. You have to find the interesting thing. But your tone of voice and the tone that you're going to tell in the story, how you write it or how you say it, matters a lot. Because if you sound interested in it, they're going to be interested in it. I could say, yeah, you know, it's a ranching town. People wear their cowboy boots and hats to Walmart, and it's weird. People are racist, and they say things like, what brand of Oriental are you? And yeah. And that story's a lot less interesting because you don't have any tone in your voice. Your word choice has changed, your pacing has changed, and that's just gonna make the person nod and go like, why are we talking about race? Because that's usually what people do when I talk, because I'm socially awkward. But when I get to tell a story, I can convey something that people tend to latch onto and people tend to like. But let's talk about a bigger, more interesting story than just where I'm from. And this story is going to have a hook. It's going to point out the interesting parts. I'm going to skip all of the small details and then know exactly where to end. And then I'll tell you the story again without those things. Okay, so hook. When I was working at Crate and Barrel, I was capable of doing 3 things at once. I set off all the fire alarms in the mall, broke a $2,000 table, and put the elevator out of service for 3 days. On my first day with our brand new store manager, I was unboxing this table with a glass tabletop, and I wanted to be extremely careful because I knew we had a new manager, and I wanted to make a very good impression because I know I'm a little bit clumsy. I decided to unbox it on the side of the elevator where there weren't customers coming, because this was just about at opening time. And so I built the whole table. I had the glass tabletop in a separate box that had never been opened. I walked the main component out to the other side of the elevator, and then I just needed to take this sheet of glass that was in a box and walk it through to the other side, set it on top, and I was done with the table. Easy peasy, everything would work out fine. I did it pretty quick, I was feeling good. I pick up the box and I'm walking through, and the box gave way. The bottom of the box gave out while I was holding it, which was weird because it wasn't particularly heavy, it was just a sheet of glass. But the thing that causes this whole story to exist is that the glass dropped between the floor and the elevator. It dropped down the shaft of the floor and the elevator. I've never, like, the odds of that happening are so crazy to me. I still don't know how it happened, that it happened to drop just right at that time. But I was so in shock, because the only thing I saw was just this glass plummeting straight down the elevator shaft. And I didn't know what to say, I didn't know what to do, as this huge crash just rang out through the whole store, because you could hear it falling down the elevator shaft. And we have walkie-talkies, and over it, someone just says, like, "Hey, are you alright? Is everything okay?" And I know that if I don't say something, then they're gonna think that, my literal thoughts were that if I don't say something, they're gonna think that not everything's okay, that something's wrong. And of course something was wrong, but I was so in shock, I couldn't even think of my coworker's name who was down the hall to call to ask for help. Little do I know that at that moment, all of the managers who were in a meeting are rushing out to come and see what happened. And over the walkie, I just say, I think I might have made a mistake. I think I might have made a mistake, breaking this $2,000 table down the elevator shaft, but not 3 seconds after I say that, the fire alarm starts going off. Because the elevator realizes it can't close. The elevator realizes that something is wrong, and it starts with the fire alarm, and everyone in the store is concerned, and I'm just standing there as the brand new manager, and all of the other managers in the store walk up and stare, and I have to explain what happened, and I'm just very shaken. We clean up, everything's going back to normal, we've calmed the customers down. The elevator is out of service, so I take one of those little sachet things that you use to close off an area, and I take it to go put it in front of the elevator on the sales floor. And I see the brand new manager standing there with all of the other sales associates standing around staring at it, and I just say, "Welcome to our store, like, welcome to 108, our specific store," and everyone just laughs, and it was absolutely ridiculous. So that's the story. That's the fun way that I tell the story. Here's an awful way I could have told the story. I one time dropped a sheet of glass between the floor and the elevator, and the fire alarm went off. That's not very much of a story. It's interesting, it's funny, you can have a conversation off of that, but it's not a full-fledged story. Here's another way that I could have talked about it. So the other morning, I got up, and I knew that it was the first day of our brand new manager working there, and I wanted to do a really good job. I really wanted to impress him, and so I got up, and I was thinking the whole day, like, I want to do a really good job. And I got to work, and everything was going fine, and so I was going to put together this table, and it was like one of those metal tables with the glass on top, and it came in a couple of different boxes. And so I unboxed the first one, and I put together that whole part of the table, and I wanted to build the table on the other side of the elevator, because there's an elevator shaft in between the stock room and the sales floor, so I wanted to build it over here so that I could walk it through to the other side and be safer about it all. See, I'm not really getting to the interesting part. I'm getting caught up in all of these little details. I don't know what I'm trying to say. And so then I could keep going, and after telling the story about how it fell through and the fire alarm goes off, I could be saying, like, yeah, for the rest of the day, all of my coworkers were saying Like, oh, you should buy a lottery ticket, or like, oh, I haven't heard of anything like that happening before. I could keep going on with the story. There's a lot of details that I left out of it, but I know to stop on a high note. I know to stop when it's funny. One of the major things that kills stories is getting caught up in the small details, saying like, I think it was a Wednesday, or was it a Thursday? Was it last week? I think it was last week. You know, hey, was it on Wednesday or Thursday? It was on a Monday, are you sure? Like, I hate it when people do that. Or when they're caught up on the streets, like, oh, I was on Dwight. No, wait, I was on Van Buren. Yeah, I was on Van Buren down when it crosses like 34th Street, and it was like almost raining. No one cares about that. Tell them the interesting parts of the story. Tell them what they're interested in. And then don't keep rambling afterwards. Give the person time to laugh or to respond with their own story. You want to keep it fairly quick as you can, to go through the whole story, because probably within the first 5-10 seconds of you starting your story, the other person is already thinking of how to respond and a story they want to tell in response, which is cool. And I want to hear their story, and I want to hear what they have to say, and I want to like riff off of them and go back and forth and swap stories. But if you don't keep it short, they're not going to listen to the ending, and it's not going to be very interesting. And that's what I do when I'm telling a story to a group of people, and what I try to do when I'm talking to you guys on YouTube, and also how I write. When I'm writing, I write the hook, I make sure the character has a unique tone of voice, I only talk about the interesting things, and then I skip all of the unimportant details. You can pinpoint a small detail and have it come back in the story a couple of times, and if you point out a couple of small details, then people won't know what's important later on in the story, but that only usually works very well in writing. Then also in writing, knowing when to end a scene to build more drama later, knowing when to end a book, knowing when to end a spiel that the villain is going on to explain what's going on, so that there's more drama and tension to the whole thing, so that the audience's mind can have a break, because you go from super climactic high to a lower point, so that the audience can like revel in that moment, like, wow, that was so amazing, while they're still reading, so that they don't have to put down the book, so that they don't get overwhelmed with how much is going on. But the most important thing about telling a good story is to be able to find the little interesting things. That's the part that most people have a problem with when I talk to them. I'm like, hey, where'd you go? Oh, I went to Korea. Oh, I went out shopping. Oh, I went to get something to eat. Those short answers, all of those can be a story. Oh, I went out to get breakfast, but the place was closed, and I ended up in this little cafe, and I had just the fluffiest pancakes I've ever seen. Like, those stories. You don't have to say, oh, and I went over to a little cafe, it was on 43rd Street. Just knowing the interesting bits. I was out shopping, and I didn't know this mall very well, and there was this bag that I saw as I was walking past. It had a picture of a hedgehog on it, and it was clearly translated wrong, because it says, will you hold this female child? Will you hold this female child? Like, what is that? How did they get that from hedgehog? I don't know. But see, that's a lot more interesting than to say, I went out shopping at a mall and I got a couple of things. It's finding the little interesting things, the things that stood out to you as funny or interesting or weird. That's what's going to stand out to the person you're talking to. So maybe try looking for something interesting in your morning meal, in what you're doing later, in your work, in your email. Find the fun in life and tell it to other people. That's how you tell a good story. And with that being said, that's all I know. So I'll see you guys next week when I know a little bit more. Okay, bye-bye.